Welcome to Learning to Glow, a show about wellness, skin health, and self-development. I'm your host, Jess. I'm a mom, entrepreneur, and skincare expert. I'm so excited to share tips on how to achieve healthy skin and bring amazing guests in the field of health, fitness, aging gracefully, and personal growth. Let's explore all different ways we can take care of ourselves as women, both inside and out, to truly shine. So let's get glowing. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with me today. We are diving into the world of psychedelics today. We have guest Linden Schaffer, who is an award-winning wellness entrepreneur, best-selling author, and expert with over 20 years of experience in the wellness and psychedelic space. She is the founder of Reveal, a global online community for women, and the co-founder of the Los Angeles Women's Psychedelic Community, both dedicated to creating safe, supportive, and informed spaces where women can thrive through trust, education, and connection. She's also the member of the Global Psychedelic Society team, and she contributes to fostering responsible and inclusive practices within this growing movement of psychedelics. So this is a really fun topic for me. We've never done this before, and it is so interesting. There is a lot of discussion in this episode about the therapeutic potential of psychedelics for things like trauma, anxiety, depression, and other mental illness and health challenges. Linden introduces her 5 S's of psychedelic risk reduction framework with us to ensure safe and informed use. We also talk about microdosing, the history and legality of psychedelics, and the importance of education and support systems. I really love chatting about this topic and having an expert who could beautifully explain it like Linden did, and the emerging research on this topic is very exciting. So happy to share this with you all. And you can find Linden at the link in my show notes if you want to learn more about what she does specifically. Just a side note and a heads up, my Simply Just Skincare store is going to be closed in early June. So if you're a client or if you're going to be needing some skincare products, we will be closed June 9th through the 20th. So make sure you place your orders, or if you need any products, make sure to get your orders in before that in the next couple of weeks. And if you have any questions about this or any questions about products, you can always email us. We're here to help you. And here is Linden. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Learning to Glow. Today, we have Linden Schaffer with us. Welcome to our show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Jess.
I'm so excited to have you, especially because we have never discussed this topic before on my show. So that's fun. It's fun after 2 years of trying to find a new topic is difficult. And this is something I'm so interested about. It's kind of a hot topic. So if you could just start by introducing yourself and a little bit about what you do, and then we can go from there.
Absolutely. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Linden Schaffer. I am coming to you from Tongva Land in Southern California. And that acknowledgement is really important in the work that I do, which is based in the psychedelic and plant medicine space. My job in this space is to hold women in community and teach them how to use psychedelics and plant medicine in a safer way that comes with more empowerment and more informed consent. And I do that through various ways, which hopefully we're going to get into a little deeper today, but through education, through women's community and events, through coaching, everything that's going to empower women in their wellness choices, because I look at psychedelics as a piece of your wellness toolbox. I've worked in the health and wellness industry for over 20 years, running different companies, and I see psychedelics and plant medicine as just another tool to use in conjunction with everything else we women are doing to improve ourselves, to live better lives, and to stand in our power.
Oh, this is so exciting. That's amazing. So tell me first, before we get into all that, tell me how you came to find yourself in this space, because you've been in the health and wellness industry. How did you find yourself working with plant medicine and helping other women do the same?
Yeah, it's a story that, it's one of those things when you look back on it, you're like, oh, okay, this makes sense. I can see the path. But at the time, sometimes you have no idea where things are taking you. You're just doing what feels right in the moment and taking that next right step, which is obviously what has led me here. I myself have had a relationship with psychedelics and plant medicine for over 20 years. That started when I was in college. I was not someone who really loved drinking. I didn't like the way it made me feel, not only during, but after, right? Those kind of effects. Even wine gave me a headache. And so it's not something that was for me. Therefore explored other alternative forms of altered states of consciousness, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about. Regardless of the substance that you use, you're kind of altering either how you feel or how you're thinking, right? Or how you're being in that moment. And for me, psychedelics is where that interest kind of started. So I would say for the first 15 plus years, it was recreational use, right? At concerts, at clubs, with friends, right? And it definitely substituted wherever kind of alcohol would play a role typically, right? For most people. How I got into this space intentionally was when I launched my first business in 2009, which was a wellness hospitality company. I started working with indigenous cultures around the world, and a lot of indigenous cultures use plant medicine, whether they have psychoactive effects or whether it's like herbal medicine, right? Or Chinese medicine for healing in some ways. These traditions go back very far, right? To the beginning of time, right? For some of these cultures. And so plant medicine was always in the space of health and wellness for me. It was at that time I started to understand how people were using these medicines intentionally, right? Going into ceremony, healing trauma, healing existential crisis and questions that we don't always have answers for. And so that's how psychedelics started to enter my world intentionally. It was also kind of around this time, probably 15 years ago, that my husband and I started using some of these medicines for our relationship. And this was also before I knew this is how other people were using it too, right? And there are people now, if you talk about psychedelic assisted therapy, right? Working with therapists with these medicines.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there's so many ways that this can go. And so these medicines have been part of my life for so long. And then what happened during the pandemic, it kind of became this tipping point, if you will, for the mental health crisis in the US, right? The loneliness epidemic that we've all been experiencing. And these things came to a head, and people were like, look, the tools that I've been using, the health and wellness tools I've been using, whether that is therapy, yoga, journaling, life coaching, SSRIs, like whatever it is, they don't seem to be working anymore, or I'm stuck, right? And I was experiencing these things too, right? I've been using all these things to better myself, to grow. And I kind of feel like, now what? Like, have they taken me as far as they can take me, or what's going on? And it was at this time psychedelics started to rise in prominence because research that had been going on started to get published. Michael Pollan with his book, How to Change Your Mind, and the Netflix series, like all of this started coming out at the same time. And next thing you know, everyone's talking about psychedelics. Because of my background in health and wellness, because of setting safe containers for people to experience transformation, what I started to see was people were looking at the medicine out of desperation, out of not having other tools, and also not knowing enough, and taking the first resource that they found, right? These medicines, let's be very clear, they're illegal in most places. So a lot of the education and information that keeps people safe is not available right now
Mm.
and easily accessible. So I started seeing women specifically taking the first resource they found, whether that was the first medicine they found or the first guide they found, and thinking to themselves, this is going to help me. And in the end, it ended up hurting them just because there wasn't enough education or information around how to do this safely. And that's where I said, look, I have 20 plus years experience with these medicines. I have more than 15 years experience helping women in transformational space create safe containers for themselves. I can help in both of these ways. So let me get out there and start offering what I can to keep women safe and let them know, like, this is a wellness tool that works with other modalities. It's not the be all end all.
I there's so many places I want to go with this, but I feel like what you said about it's become more prominent. People are becoming more aware because there is more research. I watched the Michael Pollan documentary. I thought it was really, really good. And I could see that. I could see a lot of people probably going, wow, like there's all of this research now, there's all of these benefits. It's like a more natural approach to some of the issues that people might be seeking to get help with. But like then they're like, okay, well, how, like you said, it's I can't just go to the store and buy it. I want to talk about, I think first maybe we could talk about what are some of the reasons and what are some of the things that you've seen. You work with women. So what are the things that women have come to you with and said, I really think this could help me with this issue that I'm having? You mentioned loneliness. What are some of the reasons that people are seeking this type of treatment?
Yeah. It's a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And women fall everywhere on the spectrum, right? Because we're all individuals and we're all dealing with different things. You could be someone on one end of the spectrum. Let's say you have a lot of childhood trauma that you've never dealt with, or it's been hard to deal with, or therapy maybe has taken you as far as you feel it can go, and you're looking for something else, right? So there is that. And trauma can be from childhood, it can be from adulthood, it can, right, there's many different forms of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of one end of the spectrum, and that is especially in if you're dealing with something like that, there's a lot of a huge support container that needs to help you, right? It's not just taking the medicine, right? There could be on the other end of the spectrum, um, somebody who, most of us these days, especially because we've all lived through the pandemic, we are all living with some low level of chronic anxiety and depression. It's just kind of seeped into our culture, especially in the West, especially with the rise of social media, especially with the unrest that's happening in the world, right? However you're connected to it, we feel all of that, right? From the people around us as well. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's on the other end of the spectrum where you don't feel it's dire, but this is part of life. And you're kind of like, this sucks, but this is where it is. And there are tools, to deal with that as well. So it's across the spectrum. I've had people come to me and say, a specific event happened in my life, maybe that is sexual assault that they need to process. I have people who have come out of religious groups, anywhere from high control groups, right, to groups that just informed people's way of thinking, and they need a change or they want to change, right? It could be dealing with grief, and it could be very specific. It could be losing a parent or a partner. It could be losing a job. It could be losing your way of life, right? Grief also is a spectrum. It could be things like existential crisis, not something that I realized would happen. But one of the first times I worked with a specific medicine, it healed my fear of dying, which I forgot I even had. It was a fear I had as a child. And not that I had grown out of it per se, but it wasn't present in my everyday life. And I went through a medicine experience and I was like, oh, interesting. This came up for me. And now I don't feel like I'm in crisis about it. So, yeah, it's very interesting, all of the different ways these medicines can help you.
It's so interesting. And this has got to be client specific. But when someone comes to you and they're like, okay, say, I love that you mentioned high control religion, because I know that the long-term effects of that can be so great and devastating, even when you're gone and separate from it and you've left. I know a lot about that topic, but what does it look like if somebody has an issue or a trauma or something that they want to come and work with you? You have a ceremony or you have some type of event where you're going to be using plant medicine. Is it like, okay, we did it once and you're good?
Yeah.
Or is it, I mean, I'm sure it looks so different for everyone, but
Yeah.
based on what I've learned about it, sometimes, yeah, but you tell me.
Absolutely. So I want to be very clear on a few fronts. One is I do not serve medicine myself. I am
Mm-hmm.
not a guide. I'm not a facilitator. I am not a therapist. It is not something I'm trained in, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not on my path. What my job is with all the work that I do, it's revolutionizing women's approach to these medicines so that they can create a safer and more informed and empowered path for themselves. And
Hmm.
because that looks different for everybody, everybody needs to know what the options are that are out there. And then they can go deeper in their specific needs, and I can help them research and educate and resource themselves, right? That's how I help, right? My mission is to ensure women have greater agency over these decisions. But you can't have greater agency over these decisions if you don't know what your options are, right? And so for me, what I do with women is I created a framework, which I call the 5 S's of psychedelic risk reduction, because these are risky tools. And you need to acknowledge that as someone who's stepping on this path. And you need to do everything you can to reduce your risk, because that makes for the best transformation, right? If you go into these things blindly,
Mm.
that's where harm happens, right? And so you're never going to be able to be prepared 100% for what's going to happen, because every time you do medicine, it's different. Even me, who's experienced, right? Every time I do medicine, it's different. And so I can only prepare so much. And so the framework that I created and that I teach on, whether it's in my coaching or the courses that I offer, is around 5 things: screening, setting, support, and sustainability. And within that framework, there's so much in each of the S's. And again, it's so individual. So screening covers so many things. First is screening yourself. Like, where are you in life? What is it that
Mhm.
you're coming to these medicines for? Is your nervous system going to be able to handle what happens? How do you even know? Do you know the history of these medicines, the kind of things they've been used for in the past, right? There's a lot of that screening, going internally and understanding what it is you're looking for. There's also screening of your facilitators. Who are you going to work with? How do you know they're the right person? Do you know the right questions to ask? Not only to vet them, but to make sure you're a match. Because because someone's a great guide or facilitator, they might not be a match for what you need. And so there's a lot that needs to happen there to educate yourself and work with whomever you choose to work with. These medicines can also be done alone, and some people do that. But again, you need to be very aware of what might happen to understand if being alone is a good idea for you, because it's not
Mhm.
a good idea for everybody. The next S is set, and that refers to your mindset. And again, like, what kind of work have you done to make sure that your mind is in the right place? Psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers, meaning whatever's going on in your life, it could come up in your journey, right? And it could be this concept of, I'm a little anxious going into this because I've never done this before. Well, psychedelics might amplify that anxiety.
Mm.
So again, back to the screening part. Do you have the tools to deal with anxiety? Therefore, if it comes up in your journey, right, is that going to help you or hurt you? The next is setting. People don't understand all the options that are out there. Like I said, you can do this on your own. There are telehealth places, right, that
Mm.
also you can be alone, but someone can be on your screen. There's one-to-one guides, or 1 to 2, like sometimes 2 facilitators in the room. You could do this in small groups. You can do this in large groups. You could go away to a retreat center in a place like Amsterdam or Jamaica or Costa Rica, where it's either legal or decriminalized, right? There's so many options. Again, you need to investigate. Support is about creating that container. So you need support before, during, and after these experiences. And support, because these medicines can be so deep and the transformation can be long term, right? If you've ever talked to someone who's done ayahuasca, most people will tell you 5 years later, 10 years later, they're still understanding that journey, right? It can be a long path. And because it's such a long path, what does your support system look like? If something comes up in 3 years after you've done your ceremony, do you have people to talk to about this? Like, what does that look like? And whether that's in place now or not, understanding that you might need that, right? All of this sets you up so that you can have the tools when you need them. So you have that support container. Again, it could be a community that you talk about or get referrals from before you do something. Support can be the people in the room or the people immediately after your experience. And then it's long-term support. What does that
Mhm.
look like? And then sustainability is super important. And sustainability means so many things. One, sustainability is about, how do you sustain what you learned? How do you work with what you learned? It also means a lot of these plant medicines come from the earth. Like, are you using them sustainably? They also come from, a lot of them come from indigenous traditions, not all of them, but how are you sustaining those traditions that they're like, how are you, um, supporting these lineages? For some people, that means going volunteering at these places. For some people, that means donating money. For some people, it just means talking about and sharing the stories, right? There's all these different ways these 5 S's can look. And that's why for each person, it's so unique. But my job in everything that I do, not only in my work, but in my purpose, again, is to empower women to create this framework for themselves. Because even someone like me, again, who's been doing this for a while, that 5S framework, to me, it's like a spiral. Every time I sit with medicine, those 5S's start over for me. And so it's really important to be dialed in to what are my options? What am I looking at? And just like, maybe a movie or a food you didn't like 10 years ago, but now you like, the same thing with your medicine journey. Maybe a wellness tool that didn't work 5 years ago is going to work now because you're a different person in a different place in your life.
Yeah. So a lot of what you're talking about seems more like a journey, a really a mind altering journey type of a thing. And I know one of the big buzzwords right now is microdosing. So maybe you could explain to our audience if if they're new to this world,
Mhm.
what is microdosing when it comes to psychedelics and for helping women with their needs. And I know there's a big talk about mental health
Yeah.
and anxiety and depression when it comes to microdosing. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Microdosing 100% is in this world of plant medicine, psychedelics and plant medicine. Microdosing is very, very different than a high dose journey, right?
Hmm.
Microdosing is a subperceptual dose of a psychedelic, right? Meaning, no, you should not have any hallucinogenic effects. You shouldn't see things. You shouldn't feel like you're in a different space. If you do, that is a low dose, not a microdose, right?
Right.
Microdosing, the typically, and I'm going to talk very general here.
Okay.
Typically, microdosing is done with psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, or LSD. Those are the two most common microdosing substances. And there are protocols that have been developed in the last, I don't know if it's 20, 30 years, right? There's two famous protocols, Stamets and Fadiman. These are two gentlemen who've worked in this space for a long, long time. And they are alternating protocols. So they're both slightly different, but basically you don't take your microdose every day because you build up a tolerance, number one. Two, you need to integrate your experience because you are learning things. Even though you're not seeing things and all of that, you're still your body is changing and your mind is changing. It again, chemistry is different for everybody. A microdose tends to be, as a general rule, a tenth of a regular dose. So when you're talking about mushrooms, a regular dose is 1 gram. Therefore, a microdose is traditionally 100 milligrams,
Hmm.
right? All of this always comes with caveats. And for me, 100 milligrams is too much. I see things at 100 milligrams. And so I've had to find even smaller dose for me to have this microdose. I don't work a ton with LSD. It's not my medicine. And people who've worked with psychedelics will kind of understand that. There are some medicines that resonate with you as a person and resonate with your time in life, right? LSD, typically, people use it for focus and creativity. I'm a very focused person. So when I take LSD, it has the opposite effect for me. It makes me angry and annoyed and all these other things. Like it's too much of a heavy medicine for me where, you can look at this again, very binary, I acknowledge. LSD is more masculine and mushrooms as more feminine. Mushrooms to me open me up. They're more of a heart opener. They're more of a spiritual opener. And so both of which at their subperceptual doses have been used for anxiety, depression, creativity, focus, right? They have the same type of benefits for people. Again,
Mhm.
at a subperceptual dose, you still need, yes, you can work with these medicines and pop them like pills, but you get more benefits when you use them intentionally. And so for someone that could mean taking your microdose and then meditating with an intention every day. It could be journaling every day. It could be meeting with community, right? Some people, in addition to the protocol that they use, they do it like in a cohort. So they'll do it with a group of people who are doing microdosing at the same time. So you can talk about what comes up. So an example for me with mushrooms when I microdose, I'll take it and I'll forget I take it because again, it's subperceptual. So it's not interrupting my day.
Mhm.
But some days, I'll find myself singing out of nowhere and I'll be like, oh yeah, I took my microdose today. Right. Or I'll be in the car and I'm like, this music sounds so good. Or in traffic, yeah, go ahead of me. It's cool. I'll get there. Right. So, like, these are sub perceptual things, but they are changing my life and they are different than if my everyday behaviors, if that makes sense.
Yeah, oh, I love that. So, when you hear about people who are taking I know somebody in my life who suffers from depression, major depression, and in the past has taken pharmaceuticals,
Hmm.
and the side effects were too great and too negative to be able to continue with something like that. When I think of this type of option, I think, wow, that would be amazing for this person who's tried so many different things. And I can't think of any, but are there any negative side effects? I mean, there's so many for pharmaceuticals. What's the negatives? Like there's so many great, it sounds like so many great options here, but what are the negatives?
There can be a lot of negatives.
Sure.
And part of the reason that I got into the work that I was doing is because I saw people causing themselves harm unintentionally, right? Because a lot of the negatives that can come up from these experiences are things with more education and more planning could be avoided. Not everything, but a lot of things, right? Because
Mhm.
sometimes things come down to negative, like, again, if you don't know the people you're working with, the facilitators or the guides, they can cause you harm, intentionally or unintentionally. I something I get very clear with everyone I work with is for them to acknowledge whatever you're feeling today and you're looking for this medicine to help you either get over or shift or whatever, it could get worse before it gets better. And it takes work for it to get better. These are not magic pills. And I think
Mhm.
that's the other thing that people assume because in our culture, we're so used to pharmaceuticals, right? Like aspirin makes your headache go away, right? SSRIs makes your depression feel different, right? We're so used to that kind of relationship that we carry that over to work with this medicine and it doesn't work the same. So like that's the first thing I encourage people to understand is like whatever you're feeling could get worse before it gets better. And psychedelics, we talk about psychedelics and plant medicine as these medicines opening the doors for you, but you have to do the work and walk through that door. So if the medicine shows you the root of your depression, let's say, or the like where your feelings are coming from, or if it stemmed from an event, right? That if you have PTSD or complex PTSD, right? You need to do the work to reframe that experience and work with what comes up before you'll feel better. So I think that is a big thing that people don't understand going into this work, right? That it is work.
Mhm.
That is one thing. Another thing is, I've known many people who have gotten off their pharmaceuticals to pursue these paths. I very much recommend consulting a doctor, right? It's a very tricky thing because again, research is just coming out. So not all doctors are up on the research. Not all doctors know enough to support the research. There are people in the medicine space. And again, this is where I am helping to try to connect people. And while my companies are really women focused, I do with my one-on-one coaching, I work with men as well. But there are people in this space who have medical backgrounds or pharmacy backgrounds that consult on helping people get off their meds if that's the path they decide they want to do. So that you can make sure you're working with someone who is qualified to ask all your questions, to support you through this, because that's not me. I don't deal with the medical. I just give you kind of your options for that. But there's not enough research. But in general, people who have schizophrenia or schizophrenia in their family, certain forms of bipolar, right? There are certain medical conditions where you're not going to work with these medicines, right? And so it's very important to understand that and work with someone who knows that kind of medical history. I heard Michael Pollan speak recently, and he was quoting a researcher. I don't remember who it was, but said something really interesting, which is like OCD, anxiety, depression, right? These are manifestations of mental challenges, but it's possible that the mental challenge is all the same. It just manifests in each person differently. So it is possible that these psychedelics, regardless of what that diagnosis is, could help you. But it's really important to make sure that you're working with a medical professional if you're coming like from that pharma background, for
Yeah.
example, of being on medications or having a heart condition or high blood pressure, right? These are all things that you want to get checked out with someone who understands how these medicines work and what the contraindications are. If you're someone who's not on medication but feels, down or depressed or anxious or whatever it is, again, it I always recommend getting some kind of medical screening just to go through your history with people. Because you never know. Some people who are perfectly fine, nothing has ever, medically happened to them. They could have seizures, for example, or they could go into this and come out and feel like they're stuck in the medicine loop, right? They're stuck. They feel like they're having, this is what people call flashbacks, right? And those things are all potentially treatable if you have the right support system. But again, that's why it's so important to have these things set up in advance, because ideally you don't want to need those services. But if you do need them, you don't want to be scrambling for them.
Yeah, and trying to figure out who to see and who to ask, because I like how you explain that with our society and our culture, how we're kind of used to just like popping a pill and then we don't have to do anything. Not that that's always the best approach. Like if we do have these issues, we should be also trying to do some work. I mean, that's how we get better. But with this in particular, you want to be doing things to help support yourself and put effort in. If it sounds like that's an important step. Is it's not just like you said, it's not just a magic pill where I'm just going to take this and move on. Having some authority in your own journey and some effort put forth, you'll see so many greater results. But what do you think? I mean, this is probably such a loaded question, but as far as why is this not more talked about? I mean, it's so much more talked about than it used to be. Why is it not more popular? Why isn't it more mainstream? Why is it illegal?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot there. Some of this I teach. So I have a course called Soul and Substance, which teaches around that 5S framework that I mentioned. And
Mhm.
kind of the first part of that course is going into the history of psychedelics, right? And it's very interesting because this is a very Western US take. Because this is where we are and the primarily who I work with. As I mentioned, plant medicine itself has been around since the dawn of time, right? You can trace it back. There's a lot of debate in the psychedelic space, but some people say, right, religions back in the day, right? People taking plant medicine, they saw visions, they saw, right? This came from somewhere. So there definitely is that you can trace that back. You can trace it back. There was evidence that Plato, Socrates, right, the Greeks of that time, were taking psychedelics as well. They might not be the same compounds that we're familiar with today, but you can trace a lot of that back to those kind of movements throughout history. Albert Hofmann, a European chemist in the 40s, he discovered LSD. I say that in quotes. He accidentally dosed himself in the 40s. And that it was the modern day where this research started. He realized coupled with the help of therapy, LSD could cure things. Specifically, he was researching alcohol use disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So, he at the time, none of these substances were illegal. And so he sent LSD around to therapists throughout the US, around the world, but throughout the US to work with people who were suffering from alcohol addiction. And guess what? Bill Wilson, who started AA, was one of the people who was in this trial and credits LSD with helping him cure his alcohol use disorder. Right. And so these medicines do have a history. A lot of that was pushed underground because it was in the 60s and 70s when the war, when hippies started using these medicines, and Nixon and his administration created the war on drugs. And that's where in our culture today, what we remember, right? We remember, as kids from the 80s and 90s, the Dare commercials, right, are being taught in school, like these things will fry your brain. And not only did that administration later backtrack and say, look, this was not true. This was a political movement. It was around the time of the Vietnam War and people were protesting, and the Black community in the United States was starting to gain power, and we didn't want that. And so we said, look, if you're a druggie, quote unquote, using these substances for higher consciousness, for connection, for empowering people to choose for themselves and think for themselves, we're banning that. And that's how all of these substances became illegal in the US. And the US created the framework, and that spread throughout the world. And so that's where, at that time, research completely stopped. So all the research that Albert Hoffman had been doing, all the research at Johns Hopkins as well, that was happening, stopped. And it stopped for like 30 or 40 years. And it really just in the early 2000s came back again in the academic sector of people feeling comfortable enough to research these things again. There was always underground stuff happening, right? Like in every counterculture time, when something in the quote unquote norm, again, usually created by cis white men, which we all know, having lived through these past few decades, things go underground, and research doesn't stop. Anecdotal evidence and use doesn't stop. It's just not as mainstream. And so with the research coming back again, with grants coming back again, again with the pandemic sort of supercharging, like what we're doing is not working. All of this has bubbled to the surface. And so there's a lot of groups working to decriminalize these substances, right? And as I mentioned, there are places in the world where these are not criminalized. And so they're like in the US, Colorado and Oregon and Washington, D.C., some of this is legal in certain settings. Some of it's decriminalized, like Oakland in California. There's a lot of cities around the US that are starting to decriminalize these things. Legalization is a whole other aspect, and comes with policy and a lot of things. So I don't know personally if I'm for legalization. It's really hard. We saw this past year, the FDA decided not to approve MDMA assisted therapy. MDMA, if you're not familiar with it, is a compound that was created by Sasha Shulgin, who was a chemist in the Berkeley area in California. And MDMA has been used for couples therapy, for PTSD, for so many things, and has helped so many people. But it is coupled with that therapy piece of it, right? And the FDA does not regulate therapy. So therefore, it's, legalization and legislation is super complicated. So hopefully that answers some of your question.
Yeah, totally. For somebody, like you said, we grew up with the war on drugs, and there could be people listening who are still like, drugs? No, like that is crazy. I can't believe you would even bring this up. What do you say to people like that who are, I mean, obviously you're so knowledgeable about the benefits of what this can do for people, but if somebody is kind of skeptical And maybe it's because it's more deeply rooted in them, and they're a rule follower, and they're like, no, this is something that I've been told my whole life is absolutely wrong in every way. So what do you say to people that
Yeah.
are a little have that mindset?
Well, and just to acknowledge some people, it's not even rule following always. Sometimes it's also when we talk about minority communities, right? Those are the communities today even that suffered the most legal consequences, right? So if you look at the number of people in prison for quote unquote drugs, it's minority communities, right? So that
Mm.
also is very deeply rooted. And it's important to acknowledge all of this. Like, we're all starting from a different place. We all have our own preconceived notions. That is okay, right? I'm not here to change anybody's mind in terms of that. Like, there's this saying in the psychedelic space, which is psychedelics are for everybody, but not everybody should use psychedelics, right? And that is, again, because we come at it from these different lenses and different experiences. And the back to causing harm, if you don't feel safe using these medicines and then you use them, you're going to cause yourself more harm, and that's not what we're trying to advocate for. And so there is so much research out there, whether it's podcasts like this that people can listen to, whether googling, whether going down a Reddit rabbit hole. There are places to start to get information. I run a women's community called Reveal, which is a global women's community, where within that community, there's tons of education, right? I do webinars educating on these things. People share resources. And I say to people, educate yourself, right? It starts with a curiosity. If you're not curious, that's cool. Like, nobody needs to do these things. But I think it's important to know that it is an option for people who, whatever they're doing now, they don't feel like it's working, or they feel like they're stuck in some way. Like, these are some alternative options. And watch the Netflix documentary, Michael Pollan's Netflix documentary. If price is a barrier and you don't have Netflix, you can get those books from the library, or audiobooks, right, from the library. Just there are things that you can do to educate yourself. Oprah just did a podcast on psychedelics with Michael Pollan, right? So there's places that you can find a way to dip your toe in, and you can decide, right? What I love is that I do this webinar. It's in the Reveal community on the psychedelic journey. Is it for you? So you can start asking yourself some of these questions. And I can't tell you the number of people who have said to me, I am in your community and I listened to everything you said, and these substances are not for me. And I said, great. It's important that you know that. And so it's about empowerment.
I love that, because it's true. It's like some people might be like, I should do this. This is hot. Like, this is on, such a hot topic. And then they find, then the truth is, like, maybe it's not for them. So I was going to ask you where to start, but if you're on this path, but you have given us so many great answers already. I absolutely loved the documentary with Michael Pollan. So I really recommend that as well. I haven't watched the Oprah interview, but he's fantastic. So I highly recommend that as well. I think just the next step is tell us where people can find you. And specifically, if this is something that someone listening is drawn to, or someone that they know could benefit, tell us where we can find you.
Absolutely. So I run something called the Reveal Women's Community, which is a global online community where you can connect with other women walking this path. Regardless of where you are in this path, it could be women who are just curious or women who have done ceremonies, right? And everything in between. In the Reveal community, we are connecting with each other and supporting each other. That is a monthly membership. That's a very accessible price. And so everyone, all women can find that online. Within the Reveal community, I also offer this course that I mentioned, Soul and Substance, which teaches around that 5S framework and empowers people. And that is a 6-week, it's an interactive cohort, because again, community and doing this work together is so important, because we learn from each other. And so we offer that course a few times a year. The next one is in April. And after that, it will be September. So people can decide what works for them. And that 6-week course, in addition to teaching the 5S framework with videos and workbooks and readings, we have expert guest speakers. We have that a pharmacist, which I mentioned, right? Someone to talk about these medical questions and contraindications. We have a therapist, we have an underground facilitator, and we have a mushroom cultivator who grows mushrooms and is very involved in the world of microdosing. So this is a great foundation for anyone who is curious, who's been on this path, or maybe I also see a lot of women who maybe they've gone ahead and they've done a journey or two and it didn't give them what they wanted and they don't know why. Right. This is a good kind of like, let's back up a little bit and lay a stronger foundation so that regardless of any journey that you go into going forward, you are maximizing your own potential. The other way that people can work with me is through one-on-one coaching. And that can look like whatever people want. It could be what I call an AMA session, right? You just book one session and you ask me whatever questions that you have, and I can guide you in the right direction. Or we could do longer coaching, which teaches, again, around this framework. If you don't want to join a cohort, but you want more personalized attention, we could do that. Again, the women's community of Reveal is just for women. So any men that are interested, I do coaching one-on-one. And those are the ways that I work with people.
Okay, fantastic. So I will make sure to leave your information in my show notes as well so people can find you. But this is so interesting. I love how you're wonderful at explaining all of this. So thank you for sharing with us.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And I look forward to the day where this is more accessible to people and where people their first reaction isn't fear or being scared. It's feeling empowered and curious, because I think that is the place that everyone should start from if they can.
I love that. I agree 100%. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Please subscribe and review so we can reach more people who want to learn to glow alongside us. See you next time.